Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, a deadly shooting at a Christian school in Madison, Wisconsin. Several people dead, including the suspected shooter, and many others injured. Authorities are investigating the tragic incident, which unfolded this morning. Christina Corona brings us the latest. President-elect Trump says the government knows where the mystery drones on the East Coast are coming from. He speculates as to why authorities haven't told the public, as lawmakers express frustration with the lack of information. Chris Spears reports. And what does Trump think about vaccine mandates in the war in Ukraine? Iris Tao has the biggest takeaways from Trump's first wide-ranging news conference since the election. As Syria is starting to rebuild, Russian troops are still present in the country. Arian Pazdar has how the U.S. is responding to Russia's presence in Syria. And Syria's former leader makes his first public statement since the fall of his regime. What did he say? And what is Trump saying about the future of Syria? Jason Perry reports. An alleged Chinese spy with business links to British royal Prince Andrew has been named by a British court. British politicians say this is not an isolated incident, but the tip of an iceberg that highlights China's influence in Britain. Malcolm Hudson in London.
This is NTD Evening News. Live from our global headquarters in New York City, here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. At least 3 people are dead, including the suspected shooter, after a shooting today at a Christian school in Wisconsin. Several others were injured in the attack at Abundant Life Christian School in Madison. NTD's Christina Corona brings us the latest.
3 people were killed Monday morning in a school shooting at Abundant Life Christian School in Madison, Wisconsin. Officials provided updates on the tragic incident during a press conference Monday afternoon.
That died were a teacher and a teenage student. 6 other people were injured. 2 students are now in critical condition in the hospital, and these injuries are considered life-threatening injuries. 4 students are also at other area hospitals with non-life-threatening injuries.
Police officers responded to the scene just before 11 a.m. local time and later discovered the suspect dead inside the school.
We know that 3 people are dead, including the suspect shooter. We know that the suspect shooter was a teenage student who attended the school.
Police say a handgun was recovered at the scene. Officials have not commented on a possible motive for the shooting or released the identities of the victims or the suspected shooter. Authorities say they've contacted the parents of the suspected shooter. Madison Police Chief Sean Barnes confirmed that no officers fired their weapons while responding to the scene. The school serves students from kindergarten through 12th grade, and authorities are working to notify the families of those affected. Christina Corona, NTD News.
President Biden is calling on Congress to pass common-sense gun safety laws after the tragic shooting. In a statement today, he outlined the need for universal background checks, a national red flag law, and a ban on high-capacity magazines to address gun-related violence. As apparent drones continue to make headlines on the East Coast, President-elect Trump says the government knows where they originate. His statements come as federal, state, and local lawmakers express frustration and call for action. NTD's Chris Spears has the latest.
President-elect Donald Trump spoke with reporters about the East Coast mystery drones this afternoon. He addressed what the federal government knows about the flying objects.
The government knows what is happening. Look, our military knows where they took off from. If it's a garage, they can go right into that garage. They know where it came from and where it went.
He said he thinks the government would be better off telling the public what the drones are. The drones that have been seen flying in groups at night in New Jersey and other eastern states seem to be a bipartisan issue. Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer urging Homeland Security to act.
First, to push a new but unclassified tech into wide use, the so-called Robin, to get answers on these drones, and also to announce that I am going to help pass, and I'm going to co-sponsor legislation that will combat these drones in a better way by allowing local police departments and state police departments to help the feds in sighting these drones, which so many have requested.
Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas addressed the mysterious flying objects this weekend, saying there's no question that people are seeing drones. He also said, "I want to assure the American public that we are on it. We are working in close coordination with state and local authorities." NTD spoke with former Pentagon official Brent Sadler about authorities' ability to act.
Legislation in 2018 gave all the authorities that the states and federal authorities needed to address this issue that we're seeing today. So totally avoidable, not a question of authorities. And then you have billions of dollars in defense that have been spent over that same period, and also for Homeland Security, to put in place the type of sensors and countermeasures for this type of threat.
A Boston police officer specializing in surveillance was able to track the location of two men flying drones dangerously close to Boston Logan International Airport. The men were arrested Saturday night. Chris Beers, NTD News.
And are everyday Americans concerned about unknown aircraft flying over their communities? NTD's Sam Wong was out in Washington, D.C. to hear from the people.
What do you think they are? Your speculation?
I just think that somebody's doing some surveillance, maybe some mapping.
I'm guessing practical jokers.
Yeah, you would assume there's some personal items to some people.
It's probably an enthusiast who's, stretching the limits of what can be done with the new technology.
And I think it'll be figured out in time.
I wish I knew. Maybe it's Santa Claus spying on kids. You better watch out, and he has new technology so that he knows if you've been sleeping or if you're awake.
Nobody seems to have an answer for what exactly this is, as opposed to, well, we know what it is, but we can't really tell you.
And why do you think they remain a mystery to this day?
They're a mystery because somebody wants them to be a mystery.
I don't know why they're hiding it from us. I just think that the government has a handle on it. They just don't want to say anything.
A lot of people don't have a lot to worry about, so I think that when something like that happens, it's very easy for people to jump on it, and then it excites some people in their lives.
They feel as if it's more of a private issue, that the drones are just somebody randomly throwing them up there. There's not some country spying on us. And so
that I think they would know. Don't you think they would know if it was a different country?
I mean, I hope they do.
I hope they do, but it seems like they know a lot of stuff.
And are you concerned about them at all?
Not yet.
I am a little concerned that they haven't figured out, if they say they haven't figured out what they are yet. I mean, they are huge.
Yeah.
And they're traveling in packs. I mean, can't somebody follow them to the end? I don't know.
I have seen them, yes. So for a while, there was 5 of them every night over my house. I'm like, oh, hello, drones. And then I would go back in the house. And they are much larger than the normal drone that I'm used to seeing.
Are you concerned about them at all? Or?
I am not.
If a drone flies over a U.S. base or some of the other things that they've said, I wouldn't be alive today.
I'm not concerned. I don't know why I'm not concerned, but I'm really not. Someone is monitoring it, whether it's NASA or whether it's, the intelligence community.
I can't wait for my backyard to be the new Area 51. That's what I'm saying.
That's cool.
Trump today holding his first news conference since the election. He covered a wide range of topics, including new domestic investments, tariffs, and ongoing foreign wars. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more.
Holding his first wide-ranging news conference after winning the election, President-elect Trump on Monday covered the economy, his cabinet picks, and vaccine mandates. The presser comes as Trump, joined by the chief executive of SoftBank, announced that a Japanese tech company is investing $100 billion in U.S. projects, aiming to create 100,000 jobs. And Trump hailing it.
This historic investment is a monumental demonstration of confidence in America's future, and it will help ensure that artificial intelligence, emerging technologies, and other industries of tomorrow are built, created, and grown right here in the USA.
Trump also doubles down on his tariff plans.
Tariffs will make our country rich.
Trump also weighing in on wars, saying he had a good conversation with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as he reiterates his ultimatum for Hamas to release hostages in Gaza before he takes office.
As you know, I gave warning that if these hostages aren't back home by that date, all hell's going to break out, and very strong.
On the Ukraine war, Trump says the death toll on both sides is likely much higher than reported, adding he's trying to get the war stopped. The press conference, meanwhile, comes as his cabinet picks are trying to gather support for confirmation. And Trump easing concerns about some of his picks, including Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who he's tapping to lead the Department of Health and Human Services.
No, I think he's going to be much less radical than you would think. I think he's got a very open mind, or I wouldn't have put him there.
And Trump adds that he's a big believer in the polio vaccine, though he doesn't like vaccine mandates. And Kennedy on Monday was meeting with Republican senators on the Hill and telling reporters that he too supports the polio vaccine. Senator Rick Scott, after meeting with Kennedy, says what Kennedy wants is transparency.
We need to know exactly with all vaccines what has been the research and do they work and what's your risk.
And at Mar-a-Lago, Trump continues to meet with top executives, including Amazon founder Jeff Bezos this week. That's after he already met with Meta's Mark Zuckerberg and Apple's Tim Cook. Reporting by Iris Tao, NTD News.
China-based social media platform TikTok is asking the Supreme Court to block a federal law that would ban it in the United States. Lawyers for TikTok and its parent company ByteDance are looking to beat the law's January 19th deadline. Under the law, TikTok will be banned from U.S. app stores on that date unless ByteDance sells it to a U.S. buyer. The companies are hoping to delay the ban until after President-elect Trump takes office. Trump, who once supported a ban, used the platform during his campaign to reach younger, less engaged voters. He said his administration would take a look at the situation. The companies have said that a shutdown lasting just a month would cause TikTok to lose about a third of its daily users in the U.S. Zooming in on the Russia-Ukraine war, the Pentagon said today that North Korean troops have been killed in combat against Ukraine for the first time. The Pentagon said the North Korean troops entered combat alongside Russian forces in Russia's Kursk region. The Biden administration did not specify how many of them were killed or injured. But Ukraine said 30 North Korean troops were killed or injured over the weekend close to the border. And as Syria is starting to rebuild, Russian troops are still present in the country. The transitional government in Syria suggests that Moscow reconsider its role in the country. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pazdar has the Russia update.
Russian troops on Monday withdrawing from the Syrian city of Latakia. Moscow is moving the troops to the nearby city of Tartus. Syria's new transitional government suggests it doesn't support Russia's presence in the country.
I think that Russia should reconsider its presence on Syrian territory as well as its interests. Their interests were linked to the criminal Assad regime.
The State Department was more direct when speaking about the issue on Monday.
Russia propped up the brutal, murderous regime that gassed its own people, that murdered its own people. And so certainly, I think that Russia has a lot to answer for its actions inside Syria.
Russia supported former Syrian leader Bashar Assad for many years, including recently to fight against the rebels before they toppled the regime. The Kremlin commented on the issue after being asked about the future of Russia's presence in Syria.
There are no final decisions on this issue at the moment. Everything will be settled through dialogue.
Assad fled to Russia after rebels overthrew the government earlier this month. He left Syria after years of ruling as a dictator.
He abandoned his people a long time ago, not just now. When he starved them and imprisoned and killed them, when he displaced them and made them orphans.
After the fall of Assad's regime, the U.S. said he was a brutal dictator with blood on his hands. U.S. officials are now advocating for democratic elections in Syria. Arian Pazdar, NTD News.
Syria's former president Bashar al-Assad has made his first statement since the fall of his regime. Meanwhile, Israeli forces continue to operate close to Syria, reportedly to stop terrorists from taking control near Israel. NTD's Jason Perry reports.
Residents in Syria inspected the damage of an apparent Israeli airstrike on Monday, and some people are already calling on Syria's new leadership to act.
We came here and saw, as you can see, the new tourist restaurant that we paid a lot to build, all damaged and broken. People were scared. The new government came and they are welcome. We don't ask from it, but for safety and security.
Meanwhile, Israeli forces are also seeking safety and security as they've carried out hundreds of strikes on Syria's strategic weapon stockpiles to prevent them from getting into the hands of terrorists. Israeli government spokesman David Mencer said Israel's policy on Syria will reflect the reality on the ground.
Let's be clear. For decades now, Syria has been an active enemy of the state of Israel. Syria has attacked Israel on repeated occasions. Iran and Hezbollah have embedded themselves in Syria and attacked us from Syria. Iran armed Hezbollah through Syria. This will not reoccur.
And he said Israeli forces have been directed to thwart potential threats from Syria and prevent terrorists from taking control close to Israel's border. Israeli troops have been operating near the border in the buffer zone with Syria since the Syrian government fell and former President Bashar al-Assad fled to Russia. On Monday, Assad purportedly gave his first public statement since fleeing Syria. In a message published on the Syrian presidency's Telegram channel, Assad said that his departure from Syria was not planned and did not occur in the final hours of battle as some have claimed. He said he remained in Damascus until the last Syrian army positions had fallen, and that Russian assets escorted him to Russia the day after Damascus had fallen. Meanwhile, the UN Special Envoy to Syria visited Sednaya prison, which had become known as a slaughterhouse under Assad's leadership. Thousands of prisoners were freed after the fall of the regime. And in another development, President-elect Trump says that Turkey is going to hold the key to Syria's future. Turkey backed the rebels that recently overthrew Syria's government, and Turkey reopened its embassy in Damascus on Saturday. Jason Perry, NTD News.
A British court has named an alleged Chinese spy with links to both Prince Andrew and the Chinese Communist Party. British lawmakers say this is not an isolated incident, but rather the tip of an iceberg that highlights China's influence in Britain. NTD's international correspondent Malcolm Hudson has this report for us from London.
An alleged Chinese spy banned from Britain on national security grounds and linked to Prince Andrew has been named as Yang Tenbo. He had been subject to a court anonymity order and previously only named as H6. But the Royal Court of Justice lifted this order on Monday. Speaking in Parliament, British lawmaker Ian Duncan Smith said Yang is not a lone wolf.
He was one of some 40,000 members of the United Works Department, which the Intelligence Security Committee report last year said, and I quote, "and known to government, had penetrated every sector of the UK economy, spying, stealing intellectual property, influencing and shaping our institutions."
Duncan Smith added that lawmakers are exposed to United Front members on a regular basis and called on the government to accept China as the UK's most prominent security threat. Home Office Minister Dan Jarvis didn't commit to doing so, but said,
"Work is underway to identify which foreign powers will be placed on the enhanced tier. That will be based on robust security and intelligence analysis."
Yang had forged close business links with Prince Andrew and mixed with other British establishment figures. He is the director of Hampton Group International, a firm that provides consulting to companies for their affairs in China. The 50-year-old worked as a junior civil servant in China before heading to the UK in 2002. Yang, also known as Christopher Yang, was the founder partner of Pitch at Palace China. The Pitch at Palace initiative was Prince Andrew's scheme to support entrepreneurs. Court documents said Yang has sometimes deliberately obscured his links with the Chinese Communist Party and the CCP's United Front Work Department. Yang's lawyers argued that Yang has no connection to anyone in politics in China. Yang was also an honorary member of the 48 Club, a group dedicated to strengthening Beijing's commercial ties with the UK. According to the 2020 book, Hidden Hand, the 48 Club acts as a conduit for the Chinese regime to groom senior British businessmen and political figures. The club said Yang's membership was revoked in light of the allegations against him, claiming he was never involved with the work of the group. The Chinese Foreign Ministry said on Monday the allegations against Yang are groundless hype. They also claimed that China has never engaged in deception or interference. Speaking earlier in the day, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer said,
"Of course, we are concerned about the challenge that China poses."
But he defended his growing engagement with China. Meanwhile, former British Security Minister Tom Tugendhat warned of Chinese influence.
I'm absolutely certain that there are members of the United Front Work Department who are active right now in attempting to influence journalism, academics, politics, and the whole lot. This is really the tip of the iceberg. And so the story, I can understand why it's been about Prince Andrew, but it's not really about Prince Andrew. It's about the way the Chinese Communist Party is seeking to exert influence here in the United Kingdom.
He called on the British government to place China on enhanced security scrutiny. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News, London.
Coming up, President Biden honors Frances Perkins, the first female cabinet member in U.S. history. Jason Blair has the highlights from the event in Washington, D.C. And President-elect Trump has vowed to reinstate an executive order that would give him the power to remove thousands of federal workers. Our legal correspondent explains how it works after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. President Biden designates a national monument to honor the first woman in U.S. history to serve as a cabinet secretary. NTD correspondent Jason Blair brings us more from Washington, D.C.
President Biden signs a proclamation that designates the Frances Perkins homestead in Newcastle, Maine, into the Frances Perkins National Monument. It's now the 433rd national park site in the U.S. Perkins is not only the first woman to hold a cabinet position, but she also holds the record as the longest-serving labor secretary with 12 years of service.
Frances Perkins once said, "The people are what matter to government, and the government should aim to give people, all people, under its jurisdiction, the best possible life."
Biden gave remarks and signed the proclamation at the U.S. Department of Labor Frances Perkins building in Washington, D.C. The move is part of the president's executive order issued in March to increase the recognition of women's history with national parks and historic landmarks across the country.
Throughout our history, women's vision and achievements have strengthened this nation, to state the obvious.
Biden was joined by acting Labor Secretary Julie Su, who had a recognition to award the president as well.
Now, Mr. President, you have made history time and time again with your commitment to working people. And while you are here to honor one of my predecessors, we're here to induct you into the Labor Hall of Honor.
After her remarks, Secretary Su presented a plaque to Biden, officially inducting him into the Labor Department's Hall of Honor. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
President-elect Trump has vowed to reissue his 2020 executive order known as Schedule F. Our legal correspondent, Arlene Richards, explains what it is and how he will use it.
Most Americans voted for President-elect Trump because he promised to reclaim democracy.
Here's my plan to dismantle the deep state and reclaim our democracy from Washington corruption once and for all, and corruption it is. First, I will immediately reissue my 2020 executive order restoring the president's authority to remove rogue bureaucrats, and I will wield that power very aggressively.
He's going to bring back some of his first-term executive orders. One of them was designed to remove low-performing career civil service workers. Separating employees who cannot or will not meet required performance standards is important, and it is particularly important with regards to employees in confidential, policy-determining, policy-making, or policy-advocating positions. He called these workers Schedule F. These workers usually don't change during a presidential transition. Agencies need the flexibility to expeditiously remove poorly performing employees from these positions without facing extensive delays or litigation. President Biden eliminated Schedule F classifications during his first week in office. He thought it was necessary to protect career staffers and make it more difficult to fire them. Legal experts said carrying out the Schedule F rule could take years as it winds its way through the courts. But Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are working on getting support from Congress. They recently met with lawmakers about cutting down the federal government. Part of their plan is to offer incentives and apply recent Supreme Court rulings. They hope it will make it easier for Trump to quickly remove thousands of workers. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
Canada is struggling to control U.S.-bound crossings along the world's largest border. Canadian police installing new technology to try to stop the flow, but refugee advocates warn restrictions could put immigrants in greater danger.
To stop vehicles loaded up with migrants from barreling across the Canadian border into the United States, blocks have been installed on rural roads that intersect the border. But a Royal Canadian Mounted Police Sergeant explains they aren't a fail-safe solution.
People can still hop over them.
President-elect Trump warned Canada and Mexico of 25% tariffs if they don't reduce the movement of migrants and drugs into the U.S. Canadian police say that over the past 4 years, they've been installing cameras and sensors along this section over the border. But officials say they are limited in what they can do to stop southbound migrants who are typically in Canada legally.
Well, here's the thing. They haven't committed an offense until they've crossed into the United States. So our focus for the past few months, and actually the past year and a half, has been on arresting and prosecuting the smugglers.
Refugee advocates say the restrictions do not deter migrants.
When you try to cross a border, the only thing that you do is that you are pushing people to risk it. And you are increasing the royalties that the organized crime are getting.
Canadian authorities caught 1,000 people trying to cross into Canada between formal crossings in the 12 months ending in October. That's compared to more than 23,000 apprehended on the U.S. side by U.S. Customs and Border Patrol. One man lives on the New York side of the border. He says his motion-sensing cameras regularly film migrants crossing the border on foot, mostly towards the U.S.
It makes us a little nervous, so.
Yeah.
You know, when it's 70 feet from your bedroom window. I mean, we keep our doors locked.
Canadian law enforcement are also bracing for a potential influx of migrants fleeing Trump's threat to carry out mass deportations once he is in the White House.
Fear might drive some people into fleeing the United States and coming to Canada, hoping for a better future. So we had to be ready, and we are ready.
Authorities say they have redeployed officers across the border to try to prevent a surge.
Coming up, police say a teenage shooter killed 2 people at a Christian school in Wisconsin. The principal of the Active Shooter Prevention Project joins us to break down the situation after the break. Welcome back. If you're just joining us now, here are some of today's top headlines. President-elect Trump answered reporter questions on mysterious drones sighted in the Northeast. He said the government knows where the drones came from, but wants to keep people in suspense. Syria's former leader Bashar al-Assad issued his first statement since rebel forces toppled his regime earlier this month. Assad said he didn't plan to flee Syria and that Russia made the decision to evacuate him. A student and a teacher were killed and 6 others injured in a shooting at a Christian private school in Madison, Wisconsin. Police said the teenage shooter was also found dead at the scene. Joining us now to discuss the school shooting is Greg Schaefer, Principal and Chief Operation Officer at Active Shooter Prevention Project and retired FBI agent. Greg, thank you so much for joining us. Good to have you here. Now, given your own background in the FBI and Active Shooter Prevention Project, how are you viewing this shooting?
Well, first of all, the police did a fantastic job in responding to this incident. But I feel like we really need a paradigm shift in America where we need to stop focusing on police response and start focusing on prevention. I'm going to say this distinctly and as clearly as possible. Once the police are reacting to an active shooter event, it's already too late. That means shots have been fired and more likely people have been killed. We need to focus on prevention. And one of the first things that we can do is to increase the counselor to student ratio in our schools. The American Association of School Counselors states that they recommend there's 250 students for every counselor in America's schools. The national average is 480. I'm sure and confident that once the identity of the shooter is revealed, we're going to find out it's a troubled teen. Having troubled teens in our schools, would more counseling help to identify those individuals and get them help? I think so. So the first step in prevention is getting more student counselors in our schools. Other steps can be technology. Let's use artificial intelligence in our cameras. Every school has cameras in the building and in a parking lot. If we have artificial intelligence that can recognize and identify weapons, firearms, as they're taken out of a locker, as they're taken out of the trunk of a car, and then notify the school, the authorities, everybody else, then we're in front of the curve. We're already reacting before the first shot's been fired. And there are other technology advances out there, because I'm a huge proponent that we do not need magnetometers in schools. But there are other devices like magnetometers that are a lot less invisible that can also recognize firearms when it enter into a building, and they don't require an individual to walk through one by one. You can walk through as a crowd, and those sensors will still pick up weapons.
Now, on that note of preventions, if we zoom out a bit, some organizations and advocates are calling for a no notoriety policies in the media, advocating for a focus on victims and for media that isn't inadvertently motivating copycat killers. What is your perspective on this policy as it relates to school shootings?
Well, we definitely need to focus on victims, absolutely. But, I think the media needs to start asking some more tougher questions. Let's ask the private schools, what percentage of your tuition goes to security? Even the public school system, that's the same question. Do you have artificial intelligence in the cameras to recognize weapons, to recognize fights, to recognize drug use? I mean, the AI in cameras can be as stringent as you can dream up. And finding weapons and firearms and knives coming out of lockers, coming out of vehicles. I think that those questions need to be asked. We need to ask about, putting a film on the windows, which makes all the windows ballistic. We can talk about, again, these systems that can identify both ammunition and firearms, in a group of people and identify exactly who that person is. So there are a lot of tough questions I think the media can ask the administrators and get them to come up with an answer of what percentage of their budget is being used for security purposes. And it's particularly in the private schools, those tuitions can be quite high. And for them to have a good 20% of that tuition go to security, I think most parents will want to see that.
I want to expand on that because this does follow deadly school shootings across the U.S. in recent years, like that one in Uvalde, Texas. Now, it has led to debate around, say, gun control, mental health, and school safety. Expanding on what you said earlier, what steps or actions do you see that would help lower or even put an end to school shootings?
Well, when I was a kid growing up in Texas, we used to go hunting before school and after school. And we would hang our, lever action 30-06 rifles in the back of our pickup trucks and park in the school parking lot with those weapons readily available and readily seen. And we didn't have school shootings back then. So, this is not a gun violence problem. There's no such thing as gun violence. A gun or a weapon is an inanimate object. It is incapable of violence unless somebody behind that weapon system creates the violence. So, we need to look at the healthcare system, absolutely. We need to look at violent video games and movies. We need to look at, how all our kids are raised by, daycares, and we don't have parents at the home anymore because it's so expensive that both parents have to work. We need to look at where are they learning their morality, their ethics, their virtues, what's right and what's wrong. They're not going to church. They don't have a parent at home teaching them this. So, it's definitely a cultural issue, a societal issue, but it's definitely not a gun violence issue. So there's a lot of things that we can do as a society. I think, again, healthcare is one of the first, getting those school counselors in our schools to help identify those who are troubled and then get them the help that they need.
And Police Chief Barnes saying about the shooting today, quote, "I'm feeling a little dismayed now, so close to Christmas." He said every child, every person in that building is a victim and will be a victim forever. Now, what is your advice to those who do find themselves settling in this position, either having lost a loved one or experiencing something traumatic?
Tiffany, I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist, but I would just try to surround myself with loved ones, with others who are going through the same, the same issue, and take comfort in their arms, and not to bottle it up, to let it out, to talk to somebody, find a pastor, a friend, a spouse, a family member, and express those feelings that you're having, get them out in the open. And if you're angry at somebody or someone, let them know it. There are things that parents can do. I think our parents need to be much more involved in the school administration process. We've kind of kicked the parents away over the last several years and keeping them out of our schools and out of our curriculums. And I think we need to make the parents a bigger part of the school administration, which includes security. But as far as the victims right now, just don't bottle up, surround yourself with loved ones, and if you need the help, please ask.
Greg Schaefer, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Coming up, as Syrian Performing Arts Company prepares for its new world tour, we take a look at the academy where many of the world-class dancers and musicians are trained through the eyes of a mother whose children are enrolled in the school. And in NFL news, Chiefs quarterback Patrick Mahomes left yesterday's game with an injury. How serious is it? Dave Martin joins us with an update when we return. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. After nearly 2 decades of global success, Syrian Performing Arts Company is now gearing up for its 2025 performance season. This New York-based company showcases world-class classical Chinese dance and music, with many of its performers being trained at Feitian College and Feitian Academy of the Arts. What's it like to attend these schools? Let's hear what a Chinese mother in Sydney, Australia, whose 3 children are enrolled at the Feitian Academy of the Arts, has to say about the U.S. school.
Ying Li's 3 children are studying music at the Feitian Academy of the Arts in the U.S. She says that since attending the school, her son has overcome his addiction to the internet and smartphones. She adds that her children's Chinese language skills have also improved remarkably, and they have become more polite, mature, and self-disciplined.
The biggest change has been, for my daughters, their refinement and grace, and for my son, his independence, strength, and manners. Our oldest turned 18 a year after she enrolled. I asked her what she wanted for her coming-of-age gift. She said, "Mom, I've grown up. I have everything I need here. I don't want anything." Then she sent me a long message, all in Chinese, thanking me for raising her over the years, for the education we gave her, and for encouraging her to keep striving in her professional studies, which enabled her to attend Feitian Academy of the Arts, where she has found the greatest happiness. She said, "Mom, I never realized before how precious your guidance and nurturing has been to me. Now I really feel fortunate to have such a family."
Li explains that music education is expensive, but Feitian Academy of the Arts offers full scholarships to students, covering room and board. This saves her family $120,000 per year for their 3 children. Students also have the opportunity to intern and tour with the Syrian Performing Arts Company, performing at world-class theaters around the globe.
A Chinese proverb says, reading 10,000 books is not as good as traveling 10,000 miles. The opportunity to tour with the Syrian Performing Arts Company is a rare and valuable experience for them. You can see in the photos they send home, those smiles on their faces are full of joy and energy.
Li says that her eldest daughter hopes to get into Feitian College and pursue a graduate degree. She aspires to become a professional musician and officially join the Syrian team.
And now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, a lot going on today, but let's start in the NFL as Kansas City Chiefs quarterback Patrick Mahomes left yesterday's game with some sort of leg injury. What is his status?
Yeah, reportedly he has a high ankle sprain. His status for this Saturday's game against Houston might be in question. Meanwhile, next week, the Chiefs actually play on Christmas. That's Wednesday, so the schedule really does them no favor. That's 3 games in 11 days is kind of a lot. Now, yesterday, they survived with him out. It was the 4th quarter. They were up by 14 points, which for the Chiefs is actually kind of big. Now, the Chiefs are 13-1. They've got a 2-game lead over Buffalo for the best record in the AFC, so they have some breathing room right now. But remember, Holmes had a serious ankle injury in the past, like 2 years ago. especially when he was injured in the playoffs. He somehow made it through it, even led them to a Super Bowl victory. So if you're a Chiefs fan here, the good news is that he has dealt with this injury before. The bad news is, of course, is the last person that you want injured on the team.
Well, speaking of injuries, LeBron James returned to the Lakers lineup yesterday after missing more than a week for what was called personal reasons.
Yeah, he returns to the layoff was to address his sore left foot. So apparently he did a lot of rehabbing during his time off. And this is probably the best time to do it. The Lakers only had 2 games during a 10-day stretch from the 9th to the 18th. You really actually never would have known he was dealing with this issue. His last game before yesterday was December 6th. He played 43 minutes, had 39 points, a triple-double in a loss to Atlanta. Really, you wouldn't even know he's about to turn 40. That's going to be on December 31st. He's averaging 22 points a game. His 9 assists a game are 4th best in the NBA. Lakers, meanwhile, they are struggling. They've lost 8 of 12, so they really need him at his best right now.
Well, shifting gears a bit, Penn State coach James Franklin said college football has problems. That's after his backup quarterback, Bo Pribula, entered the transfer portal this week ahead of their Saturday playoff game. What was he referring to?
Yeah, I think he was talking about the timing of the transfer portal, which started December 9th. It goes to December 28th. Now, this is the same time that the bowl games and the playoffs are going on, so the season's not over for like half the players in college football. Now, players whose teams made bowl games, they might not mind leaving right now, but those who are competing for a title in the playoffs, they've got a lot tougher choice. This is the worst time to leave. But for football, it's pretty important to leave right now. That way you get to your new school in time for spring practices. And really, there's a second transfer portal window, but that's in April. That's mainly designed, though, for those players who go through spring ball and really don't like where they are on the depth chart. But I think college football is really in a catch-22 here, though. If you make this portal start earlier, it'll be the season will be going on. The regular season will still be going on. If they start later, then you're not going to have time to start the second semester with your new team here. So personally, I do not see an easy solution to this problem at all.
Looking at NFL football tonight, we have a doubleheader on Monday Night Football with Chicago at Minnesota and Las Vegas hosting Atlanta.
Yeah, 4 teams tonight. Only one is actually in playoff position. That's the Vikings, who if they win tonight, we'd have a 3-way tie for the best record in the NFC. Now, if Atlanta wins, they're still mathematically in the race, I will grant. So on the surface, it seems like a couple of maybe semi-uninteresting games. But if you play fantasy football, these games are very important because right now pretty much every league is having their fantasy football playoffs if your team is good enough to get that far. Now, Tiff, I'm in 2 leagues right now. One of my teams is in the playoffs, so I got my fingers crossed for several players tonight, including Bijan Robinson, Jordan Addison, and a few others. Now, on another fantasy football note, if you were unfortunate enough to go against someone who had Josh Allen the past 2 weeks, my condolences to you. He's been wrecking this fantasy football league with his incredible play, so hopefully that didn't happen to you too like it happened to me.
Well, high stakes for you, Davis, always. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tiff.
After a fire in 2019 and 5 years of restoration, the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris resumed its normal operating hours today. NTD's international correspondent David Vives spoke with a historian who helped supervise the restoration.
Work is still going on around the cathedral. The construction site is being cleared, while behind me participants gather for the morning mass. And there's a sense of joy in reconnecting with the cathedral.
Historian and author of Rebuilding Notre Dame, Mathieu Lours, participated in the supervision of the restoration.
When I walked into the restored cathedral, it was obviously a feeling of pride and gratitude. Pride because France has been able to give its all, in skill, in money, in time, in commitment. They really put their heart into it.
He says the rapid reconstruction of Notre Dame demonstrates the preservation of knowledge and the skills of crafters and architects.
We've seen it after the 2 world wars, and even before, and for the last 80 years, we've been regularly restoring our heritage. So we know perfectly well how to restore and build in Gothic, either using traditional techniques or with the help of the most modern techniques.
Visitors who want to access the cathedral during the masses need QR codes. Lours says the installation of the last elements inside the cathedral, such as the organ, made him realize one thing.
It's got its life back, and I think that this work explains to us. It makes us realize that a cathedral, if there's no worship inside, if there's no Catholic worship, is a bit like an empty shell. A cathedral can never become a museum without losing its soul.
David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.